because my father was in Fleet Street. He was a pioneer of sending pictures by wire. You heard of telephoto? Well, that really was quite something, and he was one of the leading technicians in Fleet Street. And when I refused to take an apprenticeship as a plumber, he finally succumbed and spoke to one of his union friends and got me interviews with newspapers. So at the tender age of 14 or 15, I can't remember, I was accepted, even though I couldn't do the sums they set me as a test. There was so much need for young people because others were being called up all the time. This is during the war, 43, 42, 43, and it was like a revolving door. You came in one door, you filled the space, doing whatever. Just when you thought you got your feet under the table, the conscription letter came and off you went, and the next kids moved in. But I got it right, because my age meant that I wasn't called up until April 1946. So every war I attended after that was over, including some of the things like the Korean War. I managed to turn up a year after Bert Hardy was there, and it was all lovely. Yeah.
So what happened when you got your union ticket?
I can't remember. It was simply that one was allowed by the union to be interviewed. That's all there was. I mean, it's not nothing heavy. There wasn't a ticket you had to wave at somebody. By the time you got a job there, the employer knew that you were acceptable to the union. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been taken in. And at that time, Halton Press was an unattainable goal for many, many young kids. And I thought that after my interview, the chances of me getting the job were very low. So I went to the Evening Standard next door, and they took me on, and I worked for them for all of 5 weeks. And a letter came saying, start with us on Monday morning, Halton Press. And then I started on the ladder, on the traditional ladder that young men and girls took, working for magazines and newspapers in those days. What it's like now, I can't imagine. Not many newspapers. But there was always young people ready to fill the space when the call-up came, and certainly when a young man whose name, Alfred I think his name was working in the darkroom in the picture post level of the building. I went to the boss and said, I do hope you'll think of me when you're going to replace Alfred. And lo and behold, when the time came, she liked me enough to accept me, and that was a lady called Edith Kay. And she became effectively my surrogate mother. My mother and siblings were...
Just going to have to... So what was the atmosphere? This was before VE Day.
Oh yes. Yes.
What was the atmosphere? Because some of the photographers would have been caught. Bert wouldn't have been there all the time. So
they wouldn't have been there at all. Not in the time that I was there.
I know Kurt Hutton early on was interned.
Yes, that's right.
Early on.
Kurt, Hans Baumann, who some people call something else, Felix Mann, Leonard McComb, who went on after the war to work for Life magazine, and Haywood McGee. They were the photographers. After the war was over, there was a an influx of talent, including Slim Hewitt, who before the war had been a lorry driver, and Ray Klebo, a brilliant colour photographer. Before anybody knew that colour existed, his colour pictures were fantastic, and the way in which he got the job was very extraordinary. In 1939, he went to Laurent, the founding editor of the magazine. I think it was in September or October of that year, and he said, "Look at my pictures, will you give me a job?" And Laurent, who was about to be interned himself, said, "Well, I can't do anything about it now, come and see me after the war." And thinking, well, that's that. Klebo was called up, and when he came back, Tom Hopkinson was in the editor's chair, and he came in and said, "Mr. Laurent promised me a job after the war. Will you look at my pictures?" And Tom looked at his pictures and hired him straight away. Quite amazing. But we must realise that this was no ordinary magazine. It was no ordinary company, because it was a private company as opposed to a public company. And we were a family. I was one of the children when I started, and there was all the atmosphere and the bloody mindedness and the ego and that always comes of any family, but we all pulled together. One of the jobs that I did, for example, when I was in the darkroom, was something very lowly. Miss Kay had a cat. She was ill over a weekend with the flu. When she wasn't coming in, I rang her up and said, "Would you like me to go and get the fish for the cat and I'll bring it to you later on?" And she said, "No, don't worry, you get on with work, there's plenty of work to do." And it was my practice every Monday morning to go to Farringdon Market to see what the fishmonger had managed to get from the wholesaler. Sometimes it was very little. 11 o'clock in the morning, I was printing in the darkroom. 5 minutes past 11, a V2 rocket hit Farringdon Market and killed 110 people. And it would have been 111. So I had a lot to thank Edith Kay for, my surrogate mother. That kind of atmosphere you'd find from a lot of other people who were remaining. Sadly, some of them are not with us. The young man who followed me, for example, Alex Dello, who literally lived a mile away from me. His background was similar to mine. He came through the system the same way as I had. And he managed to find a way of shooting pictures for the magazine. Not very often, but he was allowed out of the darkroom, as I had been 5 or 6 years before. But he was too late. The magazine was already slipping. Frank Pocklington, another young man, did some stories, and it demonstrated, I think, the depth of talent there was there. And had the magazine gone on, the older people would have faded, but there were young people there, steeped in the tradition of the magazine, ready to step in. And when the whole thing died, when the whole magazine folded and the whole company went to the wall a couple of years after that, many people didn't know where to turn. By that time I was shooting pictures for the Times and the Sunday Times, among many other things. And I had been sent to photograph the heads, the two bosses, Bernstein I think their name was, of Granada Television. And they quite obviously had been checking up on me before I went there. And after I got my pictures and I was happy, and he said, well, look, John. And I thought, how do you know my name? He had been checking. He said, look, I need your advice. One of Sydney said, I need your advice. We need a young photographer. You're too far, not too far gone, but high up in the business. Need a young photographer to shoot the publicity pictures for Granada. And that must have been about a month before the magazine folded. I gave them the address and telephone number of Frank Pocklington, and he was duly invited to go to an interview, which was an open-close case because I had recommended him. And he went from there, from publicity pictures in Manchester to filming outside, and he finished up with Yorkshire Television, one of the best cinematic photographers in the country. That was the depth of talent that was hovering, waiting to step in, had that magazine continued.
What was the tradition then? Could you sort of describe what the picture post tradition was? Because it was something that obviously evolved over the years.
It evolved almost entirely through the influence of Tom Hopkinson when he in his tenure as editor, he was certainly influential in identifying talent before it evolved. And I think it was the same with journalists. We had some absolute idiots sent down from university and told, this is what you do, you go to Picture Post and make your name and go on somewhere else. One or two of them, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Others, you could tell straight away that they were destined to do something other than journalism, but they believed that they were God's gift to words, and there was a particular way of writing that matched the aims of the magazine. If they didn't make it, they went through the revolving door.
And just going back to the immediate post-war years, what was your first break from the darkroom onto a story? Can you remember what it was and how you felt?
Oh yes, how I felt was one thing, but how it came about was fascinating. I think once or twice I went to Tom Hopkinson with some pictures I'd taken and said, will you give me a chance to take some photographs of the magazine? And the second time he looked at the pictures, he said, it was frightening, it really was. He sat there looking at the pictures, silent, didn't say anything. He was so dour in his way of dealing with people, but gentle. He looked up and he said, John, I can see that you have something here which will evolve. I'm going to ask the picture editor to find a suitable job for you to do, and I will want to see the pictures when they come back, and then I'll make my mind up about your future. And this was after I'd come out of the army, of course. I'd been in the army for 3 years. And a couple of weeks later, the picture editor, Harry Devison, called me in and said, I want you to go and photograph some Siamese cats which are being bred for export to America. And I spent probably 1 day a week for 10 weeks going back and back and back to see these cats growing up evolving, turning into little monsters, and tried very hard to get the feel of what it was about the woman who was breeding them that made it all work. And much to my amazement, I shot some 60 rolls of film probably. Film was very cheap. I could have done what finally was done on 2 rolls of film, but I really went for it madly. I believe that there was a very big story that the editor was waiting to come in, and it didn't come in. The art editor said, "Well, I've got this stuff from John. Let's have a look at it." Went through it, and Tom said, "You can lay that out, can't you?" He said, "Oh yes, I can do that." And I had 3 pages of pictures of Siamese cats finishing up at London Airport with them being put on an aeroplane. And that was the first experience I had with cats, and I avoided them ever since.
And so that was. What sort of apprenticeship did you have? Was there any training, for example?
No. When Tom took me on to the staff as a trainee, the only thing that I didn't have was any training. I was allowed to train myself, which included assisting Kurt Hutton, as I had done during the war, carrying his bags, finding his lenses that he had mislaid and things like that. And he was very much a father figure. Great chap, marvellous man. But apart from that, it was self-taught, but given the facility to do it. In those days, I couldn't afford a camera. I certainly couldn't have afforded the film, and I was sitting on top of the heap as far as I was concerned. I thought, this is amazing. I think at the beginning, perhaps 1 in 5 stories that I worked on finished up in the magazine. Maybe I'm exaggerating. 1 in 10 finished up in the magazine. All the others demonstrated the way in which I was improving to the editor, and I think by 1950, and that was only a year, I was allocated jobs that were really, really meaty. The first one of that kind was to work with a chap called Robert Key on a, how do you call it, an adventure as an undergraduate in Oxford, Internal Oxford we called it, and I met some fascinating people there. Who were very different to what I was led to believe universities were like. I didn't even know what a university was before I started the job. But combined with Robert, who I got on terribly well with, there was 5 or 6 pages, and some of those photographs are still being used today.
How do you feel when you pick up a magazine or a newspaper and you see one of your pictures that was taken in the 50s?
Just amused. I'm just amused to see that what was predicted was right, that we were doing something that other people weren't doing. We were working in such a way that images could be on their own timeless, and the pictures do come up very, very often. I'll pick up a newspaper and look at just scan it. Just scan the spread and look at a picture and say, that looks familiar, and put it down again, and then suddenly the penny drops. Good God. School children going back to school, for example. I've photographed a couple of them. They didn't know. They were smoking in the train, and that picture appeared 40 years later. Quite amazing. But something you must remember, if you don't mind me saying, you must remember, my experience was different to every other person who was on the staff. The way in which I evolved, the method that evolved naturally with me was not the method that evolved naturally with other people. The way in which Bert worked, I would never attempt to do what he did. Kurt was the nearest one, and he very seldom allowed people to know that he was taking photographs, and I watching what he did, developed that even more. But a number of our other people were brilliant at what we used to call setups. You know, making things look natural, but fixing it. I loathed having to do that. Absolutely loathed it.
I know Bert was quite good at, on occasions, and they used to call it laying things on, where he had this knack at making things look naturalistic and spontaneous. Yeah. But and of course his great personality meant he could direct people quite easily.
Yeah.
But you were happy just to be an observer from the outs.
No, I wasn't happy. I felt that was a professional thing to do, and therefore a number of the images that I took, people used to say, "How did you do it? I don't understand. How did you do it?" And what in fact I did was allow things to happen and be there in the right place at the right time. It's not nothing clever. It's called professional, and being professional was what my aim was. I was never a mixer. I didn't booze with the boys or shoot my mouth off about things. I'm very, very tight and close. I'd married too early and paid the price for that. And I was not going to mix it with people I was working with, but thought of them, as Tom Hopkinson said, as members of the same family.
So it must have been a great feeling being part of all that in that building, you know, and in Fleet Street. Was it Peterborough House? Was it Hulton House?
No. Oh, there was a Hulton House afterwards. But it was Oldbourne Hall, it was called, which was next to the Evening Standard, which probably is also gone.
Yeah, it has. Now, did you ever get to meet the proprietor?
Hulton? Oh, yes.
Tell me about him.
First time I met him, I was 15, and I'd been sent to pick up his copy for the next edition, and Edward lived in Mayfair, and I turned up at the door at 9 o'clock in the morning, very timorously knocked at the door and waited, and my leader, the proprietor, appeared in his pyjamas, smelling of gin, and handed me a piece of paper, which was his copy, and he then mumbled something to me, which I suppose I was meant to understand, and he shut the door. That was the first time I met him.
It's a bit unconventional.
Bit unconventional, yes. But
he did seem to mumble a bit. He wasn't fantastically articulate. He seems to he had views, but
he was very shy.
It was his shyness that was the problem.
Oh yeah.
But did that cause? And did you feel that he was supportive?
Some of the time, and occasionally I was very surprised. Trevor Philpott and I had been working on some very successful stories, and one day he called both of us into his office. Actually, he used the boardroom as his office, and talked about Japan. And he said, it's beautiful, it's a lovely place in orange blossom time, I'm sure you're really going to enjoy being there. And I thought, being there? He said, who said we're going? In the end he said, I want you to go to Japan and see what it's like 10 years after the bomb was dropped, and I want you to go back to Korea and see how it is surviving the peace. And he didn't speak it like that. He very hesitant and very, very quiet. And Trevor and I looked at each other and couldn't believe it. And he stood up, held out a hand and said, I expect you two fine professionals will bring back marvellous stuff. And couldn't believe it.
So you had to go?
Had to go. There was no doubt about it. We were there as far as he was concerned, you know.
Was it slightly feudal, the whole kind of relationship?
It could have been if he had been a different kind of personality. But it's common knowledge that he was very much under the thumb of his wife, who claimed to be a Serbo-Croat princess. I'm not even sure there were princesses in Serbo-Croatia. And she had ambitions to be a lady. She wanted to be knighted. The only way to do that was to be a pillar of the Conservative Party. And of course the policy of Picture Post was very much liberal and certainly not conservative. And when he was under pressure, he was very much simply saying what his wife had said, I think.
And he gradually moved more to the sort of centre-left, I guess,
No, the centre right. North-northeast rather than northwest.
But Tom himself was fairly centre of left of centre, I guess.
Yes, well, liberal. Socialist. He wasn't a socialist. He just cared about people, and of course there were an awful lot of people who didn't believe it. He was too good to be true. But the fact was that he initiated the research that began on the Beveridge Report. And if you look through early copies of the magazine, you'll see that some really knotty problems. The beginning of the National Health Service, for example, originated in the pages of Picture Post as a concept.
Was this to do with people looking beyond the war and what was going to happen to us?
Yeah. I can't remember who the writers were then, but people like MacDonald Hastings, the father of Max Hastings, was one of the people who did lunatic things and did them very well.
So a tremendous influence, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yes, in its day. Maurice Edelman was another staff member who was called up just as I went to join the company, and he reappeared as a colonel later on. It was a fascinating bunch of people, absolutely amazing.
Tom, what sort of personality was he? What are his qualities as a worker, and working for him?
He was a stickler for professionalism. He was a very straight talker, and to people who didn't understand him, he was a very hard man. Not tough. He wasn't a newspaper man, displaced. He was hard because he knew what he wanted, and he knew what he wanted to get out of different people. Therefore, among his qualities was to be able to put together the right photographer with the right journalist to produce the result that he wanted. He was an exception. He wasn't ordinary in any sense, and you never ever thought of him as anything other than the boss. In later life, I had a very, very close relationship with him. On 2 or 3 occasions, after I'd visited him, or my wife and I had visited him and Dorothy, his wife, he had been called for some public duty or to speak on behalf of the magazine business, but you didn't have to believe it, but he would ring me up the day before and he said, "John, I'm not well enough to go to XYZ, will you stand in for me?" Now that sounds absolutely bizarre, crazy, but that's what he thought, presumably thought of me, not at the time, but way back, that I was one of his real successes. I think that's the term he used in his leaving letter, the letter he sent to the staff. The letter he sent to me, he said, "I regard you as one of my real successes." I couldn't understand it. I just worked, and if that was success, that was fine. I never saw it in my pay packet.
Because I mean, there must have been some larger than life personalities, people like Bert and well, I must, to a certain extent, Kurt Hutton. I mean, he was, a very gentle man, but I mean, he must have been quite a figure to work with.
Yes, oh yes.
He'd seen, the rise of the Nazis and all of that. He came from. He wasn't German. He came from Alsace. I don't know which bit. What bit? There's a German-speaking part of Alsace and a French-speaking Alsace. Pretty certainly, he was in the German army in the First World War, as was Hans Baumann. And I remember Hans Baumann telling me once that he had been a Ulan. Do you know what a Ulan is? Crack cavalry regiment of the German army, and he was Jewish, and one of the crack German regiments, which I thought was amazing. But again, with a chap like Hans, I mustn't call him Hans, Felix. Felix, man.
Yeah. I found a common ground with him. He was an absolute nutter to a lot of other people. I got on with him.
I did have a telephone conversation with him once or twice.
Yeah.
In his 80s. I mean, amazing, and but still very active in his 80s.
Yeah.
Working away.
Was he in Italy then?
No, he was in London. He was at Dolphin Square. I was going to visit him, but anyway, it's another story. But interesting conversation. I mean, was there any feeling at the time that these men might be spies, for example? I mean, it must have been difficult. I mean, you probably weren't there in the early years, but you had Bowman and Mann. They'd been interned and they'd come up with very thick German accents. Do you think this would have been a disadvantage, out in the field?
I don't remember it being a disadvantage. As far as there being spies were concerned, of course, they were cleared almost immediately, as was Laurent.
Yeah.
They were all on the Isle of Man, sitting twiddling their thumbs. And as far as Kurt was concerned, he had been interned, but his wife wasn't. And Gretel was really thrown into real poverty while he was there. She literally had to take in washing practically to earn enough money to keep her and her mother, who they had brought over in 32, I think it was. Gretel, I don't know whether you knew anything about Kurt's wife, but she had been Kurt's printer, used to print his photographs in Germany, and we as another person who I got on terribly well with.
So, just going back, you probably heard about some of the stories at the beginning of the war. I mean, as enemy aliens, the three of them would have been interned. Tell me a little bit about that. I guess the paper just had to survive. I mean, they had Bert and a few other people.
Bert wasn't called up then. I think George Roger, who only ever freelanced, he wasn't on the staff, helped. And there were one or two other people, weird people. There was one man who acted as an agent for photographers, who had known Kurt and Baumann in Germany. Now, what the hell was his name? That's a name rather like we were discussing earlier on, will come to me when it's of no use whatsoever. But he was an extraordinary character, and he found photographers to do stories for the magazine where they'd almost given up.
But I suspect that there were two major picture magazines. You had Illustrated and Picture Post, but the pool of talent and skill wouldn't have been that great. People who could do the stories with the Leica.
Yeah, of course, the other person, the equivalent, if you like, to Jarche, was Hayward McGee. McGee, in the early 30s, worked for Odhams the same as Jarche.
Yeah. He made the move to.
Yeah, he made the move with Laurent.
Laurent.
Yeah. No, Jack Eston was a different story. Jack, I can't tell you how much I respected him. Fantastic photographer. But he worked for Illustrated for a long time. He came to Picture Post at one point, and he spun off almost immediately back to Illustrated because he couldn't handle the family atmosphere. And to explain that, he came into the darkroom one day when I was 16, 17, and he said, "Boy," and I looked round. I said, "Who are you speaking to?" And this was a fine, very great photographer. He said, and he was dumbstruck. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. And I explained to him in words of one syllable that here we are all on first name terms. My name's John. I expect you to talk to me, call me John. And he was really offended. He up stakes, went downstairs, straight into Tom Hopkins and said, "There's some bloody boy upstairs telling me how to behave." And Tom apparently said, "Quite right."
And Tom was an unusual person in that he was he could have been a very good novelist, I'm sure. And he wrote some very good books.
Yeah.
He also had a very good eye for a photograph, which is an unusual combination. And you can see the captions that he's written, even for Illustrated, Weekly Illustrated, way back. Yeah. You know a Tom caption.
Yeah.
And what was it like working with him?
Tom, I never worked with him. I only ever worked for him. The kind of people you're thinking about in the caption side, Lionel Birch was a fantastic caption writer. And the way he got the job on Picture Post in 1938, perhaps early 39, he was handed 4 photographs of an onion flower. And he said, "Well, write captions for that." And he wrote, I'm not quite sure I'll get it right. The first picture, it said, "This flower." The next one says, "In all its beauty." The next one said, "Is an onion." and he got the job. And he was good at that, and he was incredibly bad at women. He always married them. I think he had 8, and I never really quite understood. I never really quite understood him. He was a real one-off.
And did the actually, I'll just stop there, John.
Yeah, sure. Very, very portable. Yeah, yeah. None of our boys had things like speed graphics or anything like that. We were all using small cameras. 10 stamps in 2003 that were produced by the post office, and one of them, to my amazement, was mine. And two of the ladies, I exchanged letters with afterwards, and one of them lived only 150 yards away from that street, and the other one was sold flowers on Liverpool Street Station, and they recognised each other. Really, that's one story that I'm particularly pleased with. It was about again, most of the pictures are mine, but Godfrey Hopkins did some of them. I think those two. And oops. Okay. So many pages. My God. It's over here somewhere. There we are.
What's going on there, John? What's happening?
That was at a street party in the East End of London, Bethnal Green, and that was at the end of the party, and everyone was going home, and this small boy galloping down the middle of the road, looking very earnest, very typical of his age. And the thing that always fascinated me is the shoes, which are entirely contemporary. Fashion goes around in cycles. Could be worn today.
That's right. Good.
Okay.
You may still be alive, that boy.
I hope so.
In Bethnal Green.
Yeah. If you look over your shoulder, you'll see another picture.